So I'm back in the workshop today, and today I'm going to be working on the centre back panels of the stays. Now, in the last video, I said the next stage was to join all the panels together, but actually I remembered that it's a little bit easier doing the eyelets before you have all the panels attached. With eyeletting, this isn't like when you put in an eyelet nowadays where you stamp out a little circle of a hole and then you put that sort of metal fitting in and then you clamp it down and it spreads the metal and covers our eyes. This, you're actually not kind of breaking generally the fibres of the fabric. You're actually pushing this spike through so that you part them. And this seems to be quite clever. I don't know if it actually helps structurally, but if you think about it, you're not cutting into the actual fibres. So you're maintaining the integrity of the fabric. So it probably helps a little bit structurally. But also, I don't know if you can see on this camera, but this is the stitching line from the inside of the boning. And this is the first boning stitching line. So you've got this gap of unboned section where the eyelets are going to go. And it actually starts off at a wider angle down here and ends up very narrow, like I've got maybe under 1/8 of an inch at the top here. Means that you can do an eyelet in a very small space. You can do it between boning because all you're doing is you're forcing the spike to split apart the fibres, the boning, whatever. You're forcing it to gently ease those apart so you can get in and do a whip stitch. So it's actually really clever because it means you can put eyelets where you wouldn't logically think you could fit them. So I'm trying to do it a little bit slowly because if you do it too quickly, you can kind of break the fibres, and it doesn't overly matter from our point of view because these stays, you know, they aren't going to get the wear and tear that they would have originally got. But yes, I'm just working my way up. I also don't think that the original stay makers would have done the eyelets at this stage. It's certainly hands down easier, but it's also a part of the stays that you can't really undo very easily. You know, if you've changed your mind or you're not dead certain that that's where they should go, you can't really undo them very easily because obviously you've got a lot of heavy stitching around a split bit of fabric around the hole. So I don't know, they probably did it just before the fitting, once they were happy with the way the stays were lined together and such like that. On the other hand, they have already cut out the pattern. They do already know their bottom and their top. So there's no reason why they couldn't predict where the eyelets need to safely go. So it could be that they did them at this stage, but I generally don't know. I really love 18th century sewing because I don't know, I can't really explain it very well, but they're not slapdash because that suggests carelessness, but they're a lot less fussy and rigid in their methods and in their choices. And when I first made stays, a pair of stays, I don't know, back in 2011, something like that, I buttonholed very diligently all of my eyelets because I thought that would be the neater, more kind of like strict, do a good job kind of way. And I was slightly disappointed when I discovered that all of the most of the stays, well, I don't think I've seen a buttonholed eyelet ever, but generally, so the stays, they're just whip stitched, just round and round and round and round with the thread. And some are fairly messy, which mine tend to be not as neat. as the originals. Some of them can be very, very neat, and some of them can be, you know, a little bit more haphazard. And I guess some of them, if they've been altered or fixed, or they're replacing the thread after the stays have been worn for a while, then they don't tend to be as neat as the originals. But yeah, but I was a little bit disappointed. And it took me a while to wean me off buttonholing them, because I wanted to do a good job, and to me the buttonhole was the better job. But I have since relaxed. I also don't know, it sounds such a daft thing, but I also don't know where they put the knots. I tuck mine sort of under the first layer so that it goes inside. Well, it does help if I tie a knot. Yeah, so I tuck mine. I sort of don't come up the first layer, I come in behind the first layer. So the knot hopefully just sits. I'm going to cut that long tail off though. I don't know if you can see that, but it just sits inside the eyelet, inside the sort of the raw edgy bit, so it isn't seen. But I don't know how they do theirs, and I can't really see how they tie off. It just, yes, it's a lot messier on the underside than on the neater top side, but still I can't really see, like, to me my method is to go over and over again the last stitch, so you get like a cluster of stitches over that last stitch, but I don't know, I've not really picked up on a regular way that they've done it. Actually, on that subject, this is one of the things that's quite interesting about this pair of stays, is that one of the most normal methods that you see on the eyelets on stays is that as they work their way round, they finish their first eyelet, and they tie off in whatever method. And instead of cutting the thread, they just move on to the next eyelet and leave this line of thread. And that seems to be fairly standard method. Sometimes it's linking 2 or 3 or 4 eyelets. I think I've seen 5 at a push, but I think it just depends on whatever thread they cut. You know, they just keep going until they've not got enough for the next eyelet, and then they tie off in some manner that I can't tell. But this pair, I don't know if it's the first that I've ever seen that doesn't do that, because I'll have to go back over my notes, but it's noticeable in the fact that the maker hasn't done that. And I don't know, obviously, if that's personal preference, it's the maker's technique, or if it's that these are more formal pair of stays, and perhaps that kind of you know, kind of a bit more relaxed method was not deemed to be suitable. I honestly don't know. It doesn't look unneat, and in fact it looks quite, you know, skilled and regular when they do it. But yeah, this pair of stays is noticeable, and it actually, thinking about it now, I could do with comparing it to that technique to the Los Angeles pair that we've studied for this project, and to the pair in Patterns of Fashion 5, the MFA blue stays. And see if they do something similar, because it could be a sign that they were wanting these to be that little bit smarter. I don't know. So all I'm going to do is just go over that same stitch at the back. But like I say, I can't really see how they did it. And even if you're not cutting the thread, even if you're jumping to the next eyelet with the same thread, I still think you would have had to have tied off, partly because the threads always angle. Hang on, let me finish this so then I can show you what I mean. So partly because the threads always angle from like one side to the start of the next one. So you get this slight, almost herringbone effect where you get it starting from this end and it starts back here, then it ends here and starts back here, then it ends here and starts back here. So you can't physically only go around half an eyelet. They're obviously either rethreading it back through or yeah, whatever they're doing. But you can't just leave it loose. It would have to have been tied off. So because this one doesn't do that jumping between eyelets, I'm going to snip mine. Do you know what? I'm so pleased with the way these stays are feeling. I really can't wait to see them put together. It's been such a long ongoing project so far. I said in the last video that we'd only been boning them for the last few weeks. I actually added up the weeks the other day and it was something like 7 weeks. Admittedly, I wasn't able to get to it every day. But I was boning it for a lot of that time. And I guess the original makers would have just been a lot quicker. Also, I was using a different technique because I'm working with cane. If you try and cram the cane in between two boning channels, it just splits and breaks. So I sew my cane in. So I use a slightly different technique. So it might take a little bit longer. Just got a thread hanging out in the middle of that. The other interesting thing about this pair of stays actually, which sounds a little kind of random, but this pair of stays has 9 eyelets, and that's quite few for a pair of stays. Like, it's not particularly short pair of stays. Yeah, I don't know, it could just be that that's preference, there's no need for more. I just find it interesting, and it'd be really interesting again to compare that fact to the LACMA pair and the MFA pair. Things like this, this is why the replica is happening, because you just notice so much more when you come to actually make it. And I did notice that these look further apart than usual. This looks a little bit sparse. And I did a count up of other pairs of stays that I've got and roughly how many eyelets they have. And generally you get sort of between 12 and 13, 14 sort of eyelets on a pair of stays, and you know, similar length for back. So I just find it interesting that there's only 9 on this. And again, it could be maker's preference, it could be all sorts of reasons. But I do wonder that if this is a formal pair of stays, and they certainly look out of the ordinary, you know, they don't look like normal day wear stays. So if this is a normal pair of stays, formal pair of stays, then I just wondered if it's their acknowledgement that this pair of stays isn't going to get the same kind of wear and tear as other stays, you know, like they're not going to get as much strain put on them if you're wearing a pair of stays every day. This is something just for court. Yeah, you're just not having quite so much strain on it. So I just wondered if it was an acknowledgement of that. And again, this is where it would be interesting to compare it to the LACMA pair and the MFA pair in the Patterns of Fashion 5. It might be nothing. I do love just to double check these silly little, I don't know, kind of almost non-important factors, but I just wonder.